Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really diving headfirst into the source material you shared, focusing specifically on insights from deep work, rules for focused success in a distracted world. Our mission really is to unpack this powerful idea of deep work, what it actually means, why it's becoming, well, absolutely essential in our increasingly fragmented world, and maybe most importantly, how you can actually start cultivating it in your own life.
Okay, let's get right to the core definition from the material. So deep work, it refers to professional activities. Activities you do in a state of distraction-free concentration, and they push your cognitive capabilities right to their limit.
Pushing your limits.
Exactly. The goal is high-quality output, and a really significant byproduct is actually improving your skill while you do it.
Okay, so that's deep work, the stuff that really moves the needle, builds your expertise. What about the other side of the coin then?
Yeah, that's what the book calls shallow work. These are tasks that are non-cognitively demanding, more logistical type things, often done while you're distracted.
Like email.
Totally. Endless email processing, those routine meetings, just checking social media, they don't really create much new value. And honestly, they're pretty easy for others to replicate.
And the book argues this difference isn't just, academic theory. It's becoming critical, especially now, in the information economy.
Right.
Back in the industrial era, most jobs didn't really demand this kind of intense focus.
Yeah.
You were paid for tasks that, well, didn't require pushing your brain to its absolute limits.
Exactly. But today, for knowledge workers, the ability to do deep work is becoming a key currency. It's what allows you to produce complex, valuable results and do it quickly.
But here's the twist.
Here's the paradox the material really highlights. Even though it's becoming more necessary and more valuable, deep work is actually getting rarer.
And that's the puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
If it's so valuable, why is it getting harder and less common? The source material points to some really powerful forces working against it.
Oh, absolutely. And some of these are big business trends, and it's kind of fascinating how many seem positive on the surface. Well, think about the rise of open office plans, the ones made famous by places like Facebook or Square. The stated goal is often about fostering spontaneous collaboration, that serendipity.
Yes, serendipity sounds great in theory.
Right. But the practical reality, as the book points out, is often just constant, overwhelming distraction. There's this comparison to MIT's old Building 20, apparently a terrible building, where serendipity happened despite the design, versus Gary's new Stata Center, which was designed for interaction.
But the professors immediately wanted soundproofing.
Exactly. It really drives that point home, doesn't it?
It does. What else is pushing against deep work?
Another big one is the pressure on knowledge workers, especially content producers like journalists, to maintain this constant online presence. The New York Times encouraging tweeting, Jonathan Franzen getting flack for calling Twitter coercive.
I remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And George Packer calling it crack for media addicts, saying he feared it would disrupt his serious writing.
Precisely. It feels intuitively wrong, Asking someone who needs deep focus for serious reporting to constantly interrupt that deep work, for what the book calls the frothy back and forth of online tittering.
Frothy tittering, yeah. It just seems fundamentally counterproductive.
Totally. And then there's a third massive force, just the pervasive culture of connectivity, always on. Email, instant messages, notifications, ding, ding, ding. The
Yeah.
material includes that really eye-opening statistic from Atlantic Media. They estimated the sheer labor cost of email at over $1 million a year. Per email, it was like 95 cents.
95 cents. Almost $1 just to process one email. Wow.
Yeah.
That really puts the drag of constant communication into perspective.
It does. And then there was that Boston Consulting Group study showing connectivity actually hurts productivity and well-being. I mean, the evidence is really mounting.
So, okay, despite all these negative impacts, why do we still default to this shallowness so often? The book digs into some reasons, right? Underlying psychological, cultural stuff.
Yeah, it does. One is called the principle of least resistance. Basically, without clear, immediate feedback on what's actually valuable, we tend to gravitate towards whatever feels easiest in the moment.
Like responding to an email right away.
Exactly. It feels productive. You get that little hit.
That instant gratification clearing the inbox.
Right. Even if spending that same time on a really deep task would create far more value in the long run.
Makes sense. What else?
Another factor is just the inherent ambiguity in a lot of knowledge work. It's not like traditional crafts where you have a tangible outcome, a finished sword like Rick Fur forges, or a repaired motorcycle. It's often hard to point to concrete results from just focused thinking alone.
Ah, okay. So visible busyness, like doing shallow work, becomes an easy-to-see proxy for productivity.
Precisely.
Like the example of Alyssa Rubin, the New York Times reporter, tweeting about articles. The book asks why interrupting deep work for that kind of shallow social media stuff is so normalized. It's because the shallow activity is visible. People see it.
Exactly. And all of this gets amplified by what the book calls the technopoly mindset. This cultural belief that, well, if a behavior involves the internet or some new tech, it must be inherently good or necessary,
Regardless of the evidence.
regardless of any empirical evidence about its actual impact on creating valuable outcomes. It's like this metric black hole, the book calls it, where the easily trackable, shallow, high-tech behaviors just win out over the messy, hard-to-measure deep work.
Okay, so that paints a kind of bleak picture. But
Yeah.
here's where the book she skiers, right?
Yeah.
And gets its exciting.
Yes, exactly. It argues that cultivating deep work offers incredibly powerful benefits, not just professionally, but personally too.
Like what? What's the first big win?
First, it lets you learn hard things quickly. This ties directly into the science of deliberate practice, which absolutely requires focused attention.
Focused attention.
Yeah. Researcher Kay Anders Erickson emphasizes this. Your attention needs to be laser focused. Neuroscientists even talk about myelin, this fatty tissue around your neurons that speeds up circuits. Focused attention actually helps build that myelin.
Whoa, so deep work isn't just about getting tasks done. It's literally physically improving your cognitive machinery.
Yes, exactly. And that improvement enables the second major benefit, producing at an elite level. Having skill isn't enough. You need to transform that skill into tangible, valuable output.
Right.
The book points to people like Nate Silver. He took his deep statistical knowledge and mastery of tools like Stata to predict elections with incredible accuracy. Or David Heinemeier Hansen, whose deep programming skill led him to create Ruby on Rails.
So the message is pretty blunt then.
Yeah, if you don't produce, you won't thrive. You have to leverage your skill to actually create something valuable.
Okay, career advantage is clear.
Yeah.
But you said personal benefits too. The book makes a case that deep work increases meaning and satisfaction.
It really does, on a few levels.
Yeah.
Psychologically, there's a concept of flow state, popularized by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. When you're deeply concentrated, you're just less aware of the unpleasant or irrelevant stuff around you.
You're just in it.
You're in it. And building a work life around those flow experiences, it leads to profound satisfaction. There's also this idea of attention residue.
Attention residue.
Yeah, the idea that when you switch tasks, thoughts from the previous task kind of linger and hurt your focus on the new one. Deep work minimizes this residue. It allows for more sustained, high-quality focus and just less mental clutter.
That makes a lot of sense. And philosophically, you mentioned that too.
Right. The book draws on Dreyfus and Kelly's work in All Things Shining. They suggest that deep meaning often comes not from the glamour of a job, but from the skill and appreciation inherent in craftsmanship.
Craftsmanship. Taking pride in doing something difficult really well.
Exactly. Like Santiago Gonzalez seeing beautiful code as a poem, or that quote about medieval quarry workers envisioning cathedrals. They weren't just cutting stone, they were part of something bigger, achieved through skilled effort.
So you don't necessarily need a rarefied job title.
No.
You need a rarefied approach to whatever work you do.
You got it. And that approach fundamentally requires deep work to build and maintain the skill you need. So yeah, it's a really powerful insight. Deep work isn't just about being productive, it's actually a path to finding genuine, lasting satisfaction in your professional life.
Okay, so we know what it is, why it's hard, and why it's definitely worth it. But how? How do we actually cultivate it in practice? The book offers some concrete strategies, right?
Absolutely. It starts with this idea that you need a deliberate personal philosophy, or maybe a ritual for deep work, not just a kind of hit or miss approach.
Like building your own personal bowling in towers, referencing Carl Jung's retreat.
Exactly like that. The book even mentions an architectural concept by someone named DeWine for a deep work machine, like physical rooms you have to pass through, symbolizing the intentionality needed.
Interesting. So what kind of philosophies does it suggest?
Well, it outlines 4 different ones just to show the variety possible. There's monastic, like author Neil Stevenson, who apparently makes himself deliberately hard to reach.
Just cuts himself off.
Pretty much. Then there's bimodal scheduling, intense, long blocks of deep work separated by more open periods. Think Carl Jung's retreats again, or Adam Grant doing deep work weeks, or even whole semesters.
Okay.
Then there's rhythmic, which is more about building a simple, daily, deep work habit, just making it part of the routine.
Like chaining habits?
Sort of, yeah. And finally, journalistic, which is about fitting deep work into a busy, unpredictable schedule. Apparently, that's how the author Cal Newport manages it, and also how Walter Isaacson supposedly wrote his first book, fitting it in whenever you can grab a focus block.
So, lots of options. But regardless of the specific approach, the book seems to emphasize ritual and even grand gestures.
Oh, yeah. To signal to your mind that it's time to focus. J.K. Rowling booking that hotel room to finish Harry Potter, or William Shockley locking himself away to work on the transistor design.
Those aren't just quirks, then.
No, they're intentional acts, ways to protect and initiate that deep work state.
And what about collaboration? Deep work sounds solitary.
Often it is, but the book notes collaboration can enhance it. But it needs careful structure. It's not about just hoping for serendipity in a noisy open office.
Right.
It suggests more of a hub-and-spoke model. Expose yourself to ideas and colleagues in the hubs, but then you retreat to your quiet spoke for the focused deep work. The deep work is where the bulk of the breakthrough effort actually happens.
Okay, makes sense. Protect the focus. And to make it consistent, the book suggests managing it, like a business, using ideas from things like the 4 disciplines of execution.
Yes, exactly. This means focusing your deep work energy on a really small number of wildly important goals. There's this great quote from David Brooks in there.
Oh, yeah.
Something like, if you want to win the war for attention, don't try to say no to the trivial distractions. Try to say yes to the subject that arouses a terrifying longing, and let the terrifying longing crowd out everything else.
Wow, terrifying longing. That's intense.
It is. And crucially, you need to track and act on lead measures, not just lag measures.
Okay, explain that. Lead versus lag.
Right. Lag measures are the outcomes, the finished project, the revenue earned. You can't directly control those today. Lead measures are the behaviors that drive those outcomes. So for deep work, the key lead measure is simply the time you spend in a state of deep work, directed towards those wildly important goals. Tracking those hours makes the effort tangible. It keeps you motivated day to day.
Like keeping a scorecard for focus time.
Exactly.
The book also makes a strong, maybe counterintuitive argument for deliberately embracing downtime, saying it's essential for sustaining deep work.
Yeah. Definitely counterintuitive for some work cultures, but there are a few solid reasons. First, downtime lets your unconscious mind chew on complex problems. This connects to something called the Zeigarnik effect.
Zeigarnik effect.
Yeah, the tendency for incomplete tasks to kind of stick in your mind, demanding attention. But research showed that simply planning how you'll address those incomplete tasks later actually frees up cognitive resources.
Just making a plan frees up mental space. That's a relief.
It is. And second, downtime literally recharges your capacity for directed attention. That focus, it's a finite resource. This is called attention restoration theory, or RT.
Okay.
Studies show that just walking in nature can improve concentration by about 20%. Walking in a busy city doesn't have the same effect. It really reinforces that even experts can only sustain about 4 hours of intense directed focus per day.
Wait, hang on. Only 4 hours of intense focus a day.
That's what the research suggests, yeah, for really deep, demanding cognitive work.
That's a massive insight.
Yeah.
It means you can't try to fill an 8 or 10 hour day with back-to-back deep work. It totally changes how you should think about structuring your schedule if you want to maximize your best thinking.
Absolutely. And this leads right into the strategy of fixed schedule productivity.
Yeah.
Basically, set a firm time to stop working each day.
Stop working. Sounds lazy.
Yeah. But it's not about laziness. It forces you to become ruthlessly efficient during your working hours. You have to prioritize the deep stuff and cut out the non-essential because you know the clock is ticking.
I see. Creates scarcity.
Exactly. It echoes this idea from Arnold Bennett about finding a day within a day, using your non-working hours not just for passive rest, but for rigorous leisure or self-improvement, recognizing the mind needs change maybe more than just inactivity.
Okay, so schedule the deep work, manage it like a business, protect your downtime. What about the actual skill of concentrating? Can you train that?
The book is really clear on this. Concentration is a skill, like a muscle. It requires consistent training. There's this example of Adam Marlin studying the Talmud for years, just building his mental stamina.
So practice makes perfect, or at least stronger.
Right. And a big part of that training seems to involve actively fighting against distraction.
Makes sense.
Yeah, the book highlights research by the late Clifford Nass on how constant attention switching online actually negatively affects our brains, makes us worse at filtering irrelevant info.
Oh, wow.
And the crucial reframing here is this. Don't take breaks from distraction. Take breaks from focus.
Breaks from focus. How does that work?
By scheduling your internet use, for example, into defined blocks and actively avoiding it outside those times, you're training your mind to resist that impulse to constantly switch. The very act of resisting boredom or novelty becomes a form of concentration calisthenics.
Like mental weightlifting. Resisting the urge to check your phone.
Precisely. Another technique suggested is productive meditation, using periods of physical activity, walking, running, commuting, to intensely focus on solving one single, well-defined problem.
So not just zoning out on a walk.
No, it's structured. Review the variables to find the very next step question. Consolidate any gains or insights. Turn that mindless activity into a powerful tool for deep thinking. The author apparently used this for outlining chapters and solving technical problems.
Interesting. And even memory training, like
Yeah.
memorizing a deck of cards. How does that fit in?
Well, techniques like the memory palace, they aren't really about rote memorization, which is super ineffective. They're about using visualization, creating vivid mental scenes.
Tapping into how the brain actually works.
Exactly. And the book suggests this kind of practice directly strengthens your attention-selecting muscles, the very same ones you need for deep concentration. Think about memory champions like Daniel Keelov. Their mastery comes from intense, focused training. It builds that underlying attentional control.
Okay, so strategies for building the capacity for depth. But the book also talks about actively reducing the amount of shallow work, right? Draining the shallows, it calls it, and becoming hard to reach.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. A practical first step is just trying to quantify the depth of your various tasks. The book offers a useful, if rough, metric. Ask yourself, how long would it take a smart recent college graduate with no specialized training in my field to complete this task?
Okay.
If the answer is, say, a month or two maybe, creating a standard quarterly report, it's likely shallow. If it requires years of specialized knowledge, like editing a complex academic paper or writing really intricate code, then it's deep.
And the point of that calculation?
It's to understand where your time is actually creating unique value, and then to consciently, ruthlessly bias your time towards the deep stuff. You can also try scheduling those shallow tasks into specific blocks, batching them so they don't scatter and fragment your whole day.
Batching emails, maybe?
Definitely. The book even suggests trying to establish a target shallow to deep work ratio, maybe even discussing it with your manager if that's appropriate in your context. Just confronting the numbers can be really revealing about how much time gets eaten by low-value activities.
Okay. And then there's communication. Email, Slack, Teams. That's a huge source of shallowness for most of us, isn't it?
Huge. And the book advocates for something pretty radical. A default to not respond philosophy for incoming communications.
Default to not respond. Whoa.
Yeah, it sounds extreme, but it's about reclaiming control. The criteria for not responding could be, if the message is ambiguous, if it doesn't genuinely interest you or align with your goals, or if, honestly, no significant positive or negative outcome would result from you replying.
I can see that. The book mentions highly productive academics who are notoriously hard to reach.
Exactly. It illustrates the principle in practice. It definitely takes courage in many work cultures, though. But the alternative is just constantly fragmenting your attention. Another related strategy is to actually do more work when you do send or reply to something.
More work? How so?
Instead of those quick ping-pong back and forths, pause and really think. What's the actual project this conversation is serving? And what is the single most efficient next step to move this forward? Or, ideally, conclude it. Then craft your response with enough detail to potentially end the thread right there, reducing future messages.
Being more thoughtful up front to reduce the total volume. That makes sense. It reminds me of how intensely focused people like Bill Gates were supposed to be. Didn't the book mention his think weeks?
Yeah, where he'd just disappear to work deeply without any interruption. That kind of obsessive focus was clearly foundational to his success. It's an extreme example, but highlights the principle.
Okay. And finally, the book tackles social media directly.
Oh, yes. It suggests considering quitting, at least temporarily, using a strategy similar to Ryan Nicodemus's packing party idea for physical decluttering.
A packing party for social media. I like that image. How does it work?
Basically, a 30-day cold turkey ban from all optional social media. And crucially, don't announce it. Just disappear from those platforms for a month.
And the purpose of this experiment?
The goal is to really test that fear of missing out, that FOMO, and also to confront the delusion of importance these platforms often foster. The book argues these services are deliberately designed to be addictive and encourage what it calls an any benefit approach to adopting tools,
Any benefit, meaning
meaning you justify using a tool if it provides any minor benefit at all, even if it has significant downsides like constant distraction.
as opposed to a craftsman approach.
Exactly. The craftsman approach is exemplified by people like that farmer, Forrest Pritchard, deciding against a new hay baler because it wouldn't positively impact his fundamental goal, his soil fertility baseline. It requires a tool to have a substantial positive impact on your most important activities and for those benefits to clearly outweigh the negatives.
So it's kind of like applying the 80-20 rule, the law of the vital few, to your internet usage.
Precisely. For writers like Malcolm Gladwell or Michael Lewis, or journalists like George Packer who famously avoid Twitter, it's not because it offers zero benefit. It's because those minor marketing or networking benefits don't substantially impact the 20% of activities that produce 80% of their actual value, which is, deep research and careful writing. And the cost in fragmented attention is just too high for them.
So the book suggests that for many people, doing this social media packing party will likely reveal that these services aren't really all that important in your life, professionally.
Yeah, and that the kind of attention they provide is maybe a shallow collectivist alternative to the deeper satisfaction and reputation you earn by actually creating real value through sustained, deep work.
Wow. Okay. So wrapping it all up, the source material leaves us with a pretty powerful final thought, doesn't it?
It really does. A deep life is a good life. It totally acknowledges that cultivating deep work is a continuous struggle. You're constantly fighting against these forces of distraction. But it argues it's this very struggle, this commitment to focused effort that leads to both high productivity and, maybe more importantly, a truly profound sense of meaning and fulfillment.
Right. So to recap this deep dive then, the core message seems crystal clear. Deep work, that focused, distraction-free concentration that pushes your limits, it's essential for thriving in today's economy.
Yeah.
Yet, paradoxically, it's actively being made rare by our cultural landscape, by our technology.
But the good news is the benefits are immense. Faster learning, elite-level production, and genuine meaning in your work. And the book provides really practical, actionable strategies, things you can actually do, from structuring your time with specific philosophies and rituals,
To training your concentration like a muscle,
embracing downtime, not fighting it.
and aggressively reducing that shallow work and those digital distractions, draining the shallows.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's definitely a demanding path. The book makes no bones about that. But it argues it's profoundly worth the effort.
A path worth considering, for sure.
Yeah.
So here's a thought for you, the listener, to maybe carry with you. Based on everything we've talked about today, what's just one small step, maybe even a tiny one, you can take this week to intentionally carve out just a little more time and attention for depth in your own work?